My name is Yuyu Chen. I'm a reporter from Digiday. I feel truly honored to be on the stage with three marketing veterans today to talk about how they see diversity as a way to create great work. First of all, I want to know, before we dive into this subject, I want to know what your team looks like.
Hi, everyone. I think it's no secret. I work in tech, so I'm one of the few Black women on my team, which I think is actually an awesome opportunity. Sometimes you're always a teacher. I'm sure many of you can relate. If you're always the teacher, you're always speaking about Blackness and being a Black woman and being the expert on Blackness and Black women.
So I don't know if everyone knows, I work at Burrell Communications in Chicago, Illinois. It is an African-American agency started by Tom Burrell, who was just inducted into the Hall of Fame last weekend. Kudos to Tom. My agency is ran by two Black women CEOs, which is somewhat unheard of in the industry. But working at a Black agency, when you talk to people who aren't familiar with Burrell, the first thing they ask, well, obviously everybody there is Black. And obviously they're wrong. So Burrell is probably one of the most diverse agencies, and from the creative department, we have obviously a lot of Black men and women. We have Asian, then is Vietnamese, and Caucasian. So we have a very extremely diverse creative department as well as an entire agency. So.
That's awesome.
So I work at McCann World Group. I run their global Coca-Cola business. So I kind of have a cheat answer for that because my team itself is 4 people. There's myself and there's another guy, he's a white guy, and there are 2 other people who are Hispanic women. So I have a very small team, but my extended team, it consists of 64 agencies across the world. So by nature of that, it's a very diverse team.
I see. So we're here today to talk about diversity, but in my opinion, diversity is a very broad term that entails gender diversity, racial diversity, and even age diversity. And there is a lot of lip service in the industry when it comes to diversity. So how does your company address diversity?
Sure, I guess I'll start. So Google, by virtue of the fact that it is a product that everyone uses every day all around the world, it's a business imperative for Google to get diversity and to understand diversity. And there's been a lot of stuff in the press and where on tech in general that it's not diverse at all, and that's pretty true. But what I can say, what I'm proud to be at a company like Google, because they're actually like taking the steps and they're starting from the pipeline. So there's this meme that there's like a dearth of Black and Latino engineers, and that's why they're not reflected in our employment numbers. So what they're doing, they're starting from children in elementary and high school and creating programs to encourage them to go into STEM-related fields. So it's starting from there, and I think that's really important to like develop this entire pipeline, because by the time students get into college, they're pretty kind of set on like what they see, what they know, when they go, who they see. So if they're not seeing a lot of Black and Latino engineers, they're typically not going to go into those fields because they don't see a path of success for them. So they are actually, I'm very proud to be a part of that company that's actually doing the work. Then from a perspective internally, I'm part of a global marketing diversity council at Google. We probably represent maybe 1% to 2% global of market, and that's a problem. So I'm part of this council that's sponsored by 2 of our VPs globally to create retention and development programs for marketers within Google.
I don't think we really have a process. I think it's inherent to who we are. Obviously the agency was founded by African American man, Black man. I mean, agency at some point I'm sure was predominantly all Black, but we hire and promote people who know what they're doing, who are talented and work hard, and it's inherent to who we are. I would say we probably have more women working there than men, at least it feels that way, but again, it's who the agency is, age, gender, sexual orientation, we are a representative of this country and the world. And I don't think there's a master plan that someone's sitting down saying we need to do X, Y, and Z. It just happens.
So I think I can answer that question from the McCann side and the Coke side. So on the McCann side, we all know, and we're all in this room because there's a gap, or there's an issue when it comes to recruiting and attracting and retaining diverse talent. I think when you work at a large advertising agency, obviously there's going to be that dynamic at play, right? So there are processes, there are definitely initiatives, there are relationships with industry bodies, internship programs like MAPE, some of those things. So there's a lot of work that is being done, but I think there's a bit of catch-up being played to some extent, and I think that's true for a lot of agencies. And I think if you double-click into that, if you look at different departments, if you look at the creative department, how many women are in the creative department, how many people of color are in management, right? So you can have a lot of programs, but then it becomes sort of splintered off, and you really start to see that the gaps are biggest in the places where there are the biggest sort of influence or power or impact. So I think there will be some time until large organizations get to that place where it is organic and is very natural, where we're not asking that question, but I think they're doing a lot of the right steps. And what you see now is through things like MAPE and affiliations with places like the One Club, you see a lot of pipeline talent coming in and a lot of relationships with portfolio schools, and I think that's great because the biggest barrier for me to get into advertising was I didn't even know how to get in or that this was a career, right? I think that is one of our biggest issues. So once we sort of open that floodgate and we allow people to realize they can be themselves and be comfortable and still succeed in this environment, I think all those other steps after, when you get to the management levels or you fill out a creative department, that will happen more naturally. And then quickly on the Coke side, luckily, and I think this is no secret to most, Coke, because of the sort of universal nature of the product and the scale of it, even since the 60s, they've been very sort of intent on being having diverse casting and knowing the importance of representation and the ads that they put out there, and they caught some flack for it. They always have, in a lot of like seminal moments, they have subtext within their communications that try to address inequalities and things of that nature. So luckily on the client side, I think they're leaps and bounds ahead, and you see that in their board of directors and the people that are my day-to-day clients. So those guys have processes, but I think it's much more organic and natural on their end, and I think large agencies are getting there.
I see.
Just to add to Coke, is one of the agency's second clients in the 70s. So just to talk about the diversity of Coke, they were one of the first brands to hire a minority agency. So
I see. So can each of you give me an anecdote that showed why diverse perspectives were important or necessary in your work or in your creative process?
If I could give an example, not just my own personal experience, but like a public personal experience. No shade to anyone here who's at Pepsi, but the Pepsi ad was a reflection of and not to say that there's not diverse people in the room, but if there were diverse people in the room, it doesn't seem that they were empowered to speak up. And I think that is the key. You can have people in the room, but if they don't have the power to make those creative decisions, we're going to see those kind of ads continue to come out and those mistakes being made. So that to me is it's not just having a seat at the table, it's having a voice and the power to make changes at that seat at the table.
I mean, I think, and this is just a personal thing, this may not be a popular sort of position to take, but I think we've done ourselves a disservice because when you talk about diversity and the importance of diversity or the value of diversity, it almost feels like insurgent. It feels like it's a bit like tangential. It's like a thing we have to do. It kind of feels forced, right? And part of that is just systemic and just sort of trying to catch up. But I think even we play into that. And for me, if I take a step back, I think about advertising and communications and marketing and the huge amount of influence we have in people's lives and the way they view themselves, and that sounds a little lofty. But if you think about that responsibility, I think we never as an industry, no matter what color you are, we never acknowledge to ourselves that we have a problem when it comes to providing a diverse perspective. There are a lot of us that create work in our own image, right? You hear about the liberal bubble, or you hear about the East Coast elites. That's because of where the agencies are centered at, right? So what you have is, in this industry that's all about creating stories, allowing people to sort of see themselves in those stories, it's just people making work that reflects the people that are making the work. So when I think about it that way, and if we can acknowledge that as an industry, we would like to stay away from that, putting and injecting diversity into agencies is the easiest way, because if I bring you into my agency, there's no way that you're gonna have the same perspective that I have, or that those 10 creative directors that approve that idea have. So injecting that, to me, feels like it protects the sort of uniqueness and the creativity of the stories that we end up putting out there in the world, and they're much more reflective of the world, at large. So I think if we all acknowledge we're at risk in advertising of talking to ourselves, diversity is just one way we can hedge against that. So, like I said, I think we always start with we need diversity, but it's like, no, diversity serves a purpose, because we're telling stories to the world. The room should reflect the different groups and bodies of people out there that we're trying to attract and influence and impact. But yeah,
I would add to that, and I would put a challenge to all our creatives in the room, is don't stop at ad agencies. Get on the brand side. Mm-hmm. For us as a black agency, there are numerous times where I am selling, or we're selling creative to people who are not the target. And people buy what they understand. And if you don't understand the African American community, or you don't understand the LGBTQ community, or you don't understand women, you filter out that information, and that creative and that work needs to fit what you think that target audience is. So it is very difficult at times to say, hey, this is what or how you should communicate with the African American community, or this is how you should communicate with women. And I'm talking to a older white male. And not that they don't all get it, and not picking on old white males, but it's human nature. It's just like, I don't understand. So you spend a lot of time explaining things that sometimes we think are like, why do I need to explain it? This is life, this is their experience, but they don't know. So I think if there were more diversity on the other side of the table, you would often get better work, more insightful work, and that will help. So I challenge my creatives out there, don't just stop at ad agency, go to the client side, become a brand manager. That is where you can also help make a lot of difference, and the work will get better. But diversity of thought, diversity of mind, your unique perspective is what makes all of this work. So another side story, we had a young lady who actually we hired from the program last year. And she honestly sat down and said that she felt she was not black enough to work at the agency, and she was having trouble. And I told her, it's like, you do realize we have a Chinese art director, an Indian creative director, there's a Caucasian, art director. It's like, your perspective is what, one, you're a good writer, that's why we hired it. Two, you have a different perspective on being black in America. Use that. That is why you're here. Like, we want your voice. And if something's not right, there's an entire agency that can help shape and mold and make it fit the brand that you're working on. But be you. So just want to say that, like, that diversity of thought is important, because she has a voice and it needs to be heard, and it may not be right for every single thing, but it will be right for something.
Natasha, you brought up the Pepsi ad, and I want to follow up on that. I feel like lots of brands started reassessing cost marketing after consumer backlashes to Pepsi and others. So how can a brand stay relevant with its consumers and make a social stand at the same time?
I think there's a way to do it, but it has to be authentic. Oftentimes, I can't think of an example right now, unfortunately, but sometimes you see brands speaking about causes or going into spaces that they don't necessarily have any business doing, and it doesn't feel authentic, and it feels more opportunistic. And I think consumers these days are very sassy, and they pick up on that. very quickly, and it could do more harm than intended. So I think brands need to really think about the places where it makes sense for them and where they can have an authentic voice and make an authentic difference in a particular cause.
I love that you talked about authenticity, so the thing that I think people are starting to realize is you could for so long put a message out there and just put a lot of money behind it, and you could influence people and they could sort of believe that. But now, because there's so much information, people aren't just evaluating your product. They're evaluating your product, your company, your brand, your corporate culture. It's all out there. So it's got to be synergistic. And because a lot of companies started in a place where they didn't have to do that, the public is starting to suss out the differences. Like, no, that's BS, that's BS. So that's why new brands have an advantage, because they can create it all from one sort of brand voice and all based on one sort of core vision. Before that wasn't the thing, right? So there's a bit of work that these large companies are gonna have to do to make sure there's alignment so that they do know how to show up authentically. And I mean, for Coke, like I said, they for a very long time have dibbled and dabbled in social commentary, purpose-driven stuff. But even they went too far with it, if you ask a lot of people on their end, because what happened was when they had Open Happiness, which I think most people are familiar with, you started seeing a lot of ads that represented the value of happiness, but you didn't see people drinking Coke, right? So they had to have a moment where they had to ask themselves, yes, we've always stood for things and we know what our values are. We're all about optimism and togetherness and community, and that is something that people associate and expect from Coke, but it still shouldn't overtake the fact that we're trying to sell liquid, right? So they've sort of pulled back on some of that stuff, and where we've gotten to is a little bit of a medium, which is we still need to represent the values of this brand, and we still need to put our point of view about certain things out there in the world, but it doesn't always have to be the subject of an ad or the subject of something we do. It can be the subtext. So even if you look at some of their past ads, like Mean Joe Green, yeah, that's an ad about a football player and a kid and getting a jersey, but there was a subtext about, if you think about the context in 1979 when that ad came out, it was resurgent racism, right? So, or the people standing on the hilltop, that was around the Vietnam War. So it's you don't have to say the thing to still say how you feel as a brand about a particular issue that is impacting the world that you're operating in. So I think sometimes it's easy for us to do the cheat thing and just say, we as a brand care about this, but that's polarizing, right? So we live in a very polarizing environment. Use the creativity to craft a story in a way where on one level you can just accept it as a beautiful story, but other people, it might connect with people on a more purpose-driven level or a more values-based level. You can kind of do both of those things within one piece of work. It's possible.
Yeah, but I find it's really hard to find that sweet spot.
It's hard, but I guess that's why we're all in this room, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Creativity, that's why we're worth, these marketers hiring us as opposed to bringing people in-house for the most part. Because we have people that have fluid and free thought, and they look at things from a different perspective. That's the worst risk that any of us can look at, which is how hard something is, and just going back to the lowest common denominator. Because then everything's vanilla, right? It's just, nobody wants that. So it's hard, but there's a lot of examples that have proven it's possible.
If I could just piggyback on that,
go ahead, yeah.
If you think about what Starbucks tried to do when they were trying to bring people together, when they kind of felt this undercurrent of discourse in America, and they got a ton of backlash because they're who is Starbucks to tell me to go have a coffee with someone I don't know and who's different from me? It's really tough. So I totally hear what you're saying, but it's a very, very, very tough line, and I don't know if there's one particular brand that does it best, and that's why I feel it takes partnership from the agency, from the brand, to think about what is authentic to the brand, where are the areas that we as a brand can actually impact and that we actually have business in impacting, because you can face that backlash in the public.
Just to add to that, and I'll be brief just because I'm pretty much just reiterating what you guys have already said. I think it's, to your point, it's authenticity, the right place to play in. And at the end of the day, consumers are a lot smarter than we make out to be sometimes, and they smell BS when it happens. So I think a brand, you can't do that overnight. You just can't walk up one day and then say, oh, we're gonna put our stake in the ground on this subject when you've done nothing about, you haven't worked or played in that area ever. So I think to your point, like Coke has kind of been in that area since I can remember. Mm-hmm. So when they do something, it feels more authentic, I believe it. If they just all of a sudden, now we're gonna take up the issue of LGBTQ rights, it's like, where did that come from? So I think it's, the gentleman earlier that spoke, it's like, talk is cheap, be about it. Like that needs to be who you are day in, day out in all of your communications. You just can't come out the door one day and then just say, we're gonna do this. Because then people do what you said, like, well, who are you to all of a sudden, decide to plant your flag on this issue?
And people don't just see that and think that. People now have a platform to tell the world that.
They amplify it. They
yeah.
amplify
And say, like, that's
exactly.
BS, right? So.
I feel like just when a question popped into my mind, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Dan, and because you work on a big account at a big agency, and you mentioned in-house a few times earlier, and so I want to get your perspective on in-house agencies at brands.
This is a personal opinion. That's a caveat, asterisk. I think there's a lot of factors that determine if that's successful or not successful, but I think to me, the risk of it there's some big risk in it, right? I think we all, or most of us, have been in situations where, although our job is to create work on behalf of clients, we're just creating work for what that client has in their mind, right? It's just basically being dictated to you, you're making it, people aren't sort of engaged, it's just, what you're gonna end up with. I think if that dynamic exists with an agency partner and a marketer, it surely must exist when everybody works for the same company. And it's like navel gazing, and nobody wants to challenge or do anything sort of bold or risky, right? Everybody wants to keep their job in that one place. Everybody is talking the same language. Nobody has an outside perspective. So you can bring outside people in, but once you bring them into an internal culture and their paycheck is dependent and reliant upon them playing nice, I don't know how you get great creativity always out of that. It's possible if the organization itself has a culture that sort of facilitates that, and I'm sure there are examples of that. But I think the larger the organization, the more siloed the sort of marketing sort of body is within it, if you take on that responsibility to actually be creating and telling your own story, the risk is you are definitely talking to yourself, and other people are probably gonna realize it. I think having external partners do your creativity is a built-in way for you to have a sense check, right? Because it's everybody in this room's responsibility to be out there interacting with culture and sort of stimulating their own creativity. But you do that because that's kind of how you were born, and that's what your strengths are. That's what attracts you to advertising as an industry. I would say it's harder for that type of person who's always trying to stay on top of creative stimuli to say, I'm gonna go work for this one brand, I'm gonna make their ads, and I'm gonna make a difference, and be surrounded by a bunch of other people who have to make ads for this one company. But again, that's just a personal opinion. I'm sure it's possible. I just think there's some risk.
All right. Do you have anything to add to this, Natasha, as you're on the client side?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. But I think with what you said, Dhane, is right. It depends on the company. I've been at other companies that are more traditional, not as innovative, and they've tried to do the in-house agency, and it just did not work. Because the ideas were stale, to be honest. Ideas were stale. People are doing it from one perspective. They're not of the culture, so it's not cool. And we were trying to market to millennials, and it's like, you're not a millennial. You don't know the culture. You don't understand the culture. So I think it is awesome when you have someone from the outside that's able to give you a fresh pair of eyes and a fresh perspective, and collaborate with you as a brand who knows you live, you breathe the brand, but there's someone who's living and breathing the culture. I think that collaboration is super powerful.
Yeah.
Don't live in your own bubble.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think we've said it all. It's diversity of thought, and that's not to say that in-house agencies or brands that do their own advertising do bad advertising. There are some that are doing great jobs. So it's not a death sentence if your brand is like, oh, we're going to do our own advertising. But I think you do run the risk of groupthink and talking to yourselves. And then there's job security. It's like no one's going to tell the emperor he's naked. It's just like, no, it looks good.
Yeah.
We're all happy with it, and you never know because everyone's going to tell you what you want to hear. But, that can happen anywhere.
You have enough agencies that become that. Agencies can become that themselves, even if they're not inside of a building. They just want to say yes, yes, yes. They don't want to lose the account. They don't want to risk anything. They know what type of work that client expects. And again, that might work for certain agency-client relationships because that's the expectation. But like I said, I don't think you need to build a structure inside of a company to get somebody to pretty much do what you want them to do. You can have an agency do that. You just have to find a certain agency that's okay with that.
Then who will take the responsibility if something goes wrong?
Say that again?
Who will take the responsibility if something goes wrong?
Oh.
They'll find someone to blame for sure.
They could pass the blame to the agency, right?
Yeah, having an external partner definitely makes it easier
Liability.
to find a scapegoat.
I see. Sometimes like I'm constantly wondering, like if the current political climate makes it harder for brands and agencies to create ads. I remember that right after the presidential election, Airbnb launched We Accept campaign to promote inclusion and diversity. And so how can a brand have a voice under the Trump administration, in your opinion?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, two things you never talk about, politics and religion, right? I think, brands in general, before this administration, they tend to stay away from politics for the most part. Social issues they'll get involved in, but if you think about it from a brand standpoint, and we'll just look at it as business, if you are a Fortune 500, Fortune 10 company, you have to do business with the government and whatever administration is in power. So you don't want to run afoul of any administration. That's just business sense. So I think most brands, for the most part, will stay out of politics. Now, we are in different times, so we'll see what happens as we move forward. I don't know. It's an interesting time. Nothing's the same. All rules are gone. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
We're in bizarro land. So
Yeah, I think, and that's an understatement.
Yeah.
You're putting it lightly.
Yeah, very much so. It is, I do think that it's going to change. I definitely, because particularly see what happened with the NFL this weekend. They would never take a stance like that.
Right.
Never.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to start to see brands start towing that line a bit more as some social, because you say you've played into social issues.
Right.
A lot of social issues are being threatened in this administration. So I think as that continues, you'll start to see brands start subtly seeing, testing out the limits there. I think it's going to change, particularly with maybe not some of the legacy, like old school brands, but I think some of the younger, or tech brands, they're really going to push and test the limits there.
go ahead.
I'll just quickly add. I think we'll probably look back in 10 years and there'll be like a BT and an AT, like a before Trump and an after Trump. But that question,
We're changing calendars.
mark my words, put it on Twitter, I'm telling you.
There's no more AD. It's
So before, if you would have asked that question a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, it would have been a much easier question to answer, right? Mm-hmm. Because the world of politics or anything else like that is naturally polarizing, and you got half here and half there. Brands are trying to appeal to as many people as possible. So there was a small contingent of brands that could say, nope, we're all about we're monocle. We know who our sort of subscription base comes from. We can sort of micro target them and piss other people off, and that's okay. World stayed separately apart. What's happening now is it's not just on the brands, right? What's happening is the tenor and the administration itself is coming headfirst into that world. They're stoking those conversations, divisions, conflicts. So the brands are gonna be forced to have to pick a side in a lot of cases, which is like I said, I think it's, to your point, it's a first. I don't know if that's ever happened before. So whereas a brand usually has the sort of tendency to wanna sort of sit on the fence for their business imperatives, a lot of them are being backed up against the wall and saying, what are you gonna do now?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of conversations are happening internally about like, who are we? And like, who can we afford to actually alienate because we do need to stand for something, or the people are demanding that we stand for something, because the pressure is coming from people too.
Yeah. I mean, just analogy is like you literally have a bully pushing people around, and eventually they will push back. And that's the same with brands and businesses. You can only push someone so far, and they're going to push back. Like that's a law of nature. So I think this past weekend is what you saw. You saw the NFL get pushed into the corner, and they had to push back, or at least a team did. Like,
well, it's only about to just get interesting because you're going to have this side boycotting and this side boycotting, and they're going to be caught in the middle. So I don't know where that one plays out.
I think it's about to start. If you see, like, earlier this year, folks were like boycotting Nordstrom. So there's like a list of all of these stores that sold Ivanka Trump's shoes. Consumers pushed back, and then some stores started dropping it. And I don't think they would have ever done that before, but I think we are in, you said bizarro world?
It's bizarro land.
Yes, that's exactly right. We're going to see companies and brands do, like, as the administration continues to do things we've never seen before, you're going to start to see brands do the same.
True. I mean, like I personally saw lots of brand leaders, being very vocal on social media. Look at JP Morgan's CMO, Kristen. Like, she constantly tweet something like, I'm putting ads from here, from there. It's just brands are very vocal nowadays.
I think it goes back to the thing I was saying before. Like, you can't hide. Like, we live in a world where people are going to demand that you say where you sit and where you stand. And everyone's not going to be able to be made happy. Like, there's no like universal sort of position to take on something where everybody's like, yep, that's the right one. You're going to piss somebody off.
Let's switch from politics to collaboration.
Please.
I want to know more about like how you collaborate with your team. I mean, like, did you ever run into a situation where you were holding on to an idea simply because it was your idea, while it may not be the best for the brand? And if so, like how you typically collaborate with your team members?
I'll start if you don't mind. Okay. I mean, working at an ad agency in the creative department, that's daily, that's hourly. Whether it's a team presenting something that's not right for a brand, obviously, our target being the African American community, it's like, hey, you want to do this ad in this voice. Like, that's great, this is hilarious, I love it. That is not the voice of the client. Like, that's not, it's, I'll just use McDonald's, which is a client. It's like they live and walk on the sunny side of the street. That is McDonald's. Like, that is who they are. You can't take this tone with McDonald's. I don't care how right it is for the audience. It's not right for the brand. So that is daily in what we do. And it's, whether it's a creative team, sometimes it's creative directors. I can take stuff to my chief creative officer, and he's like, T, this isn't right. Like, that's not their voice. It's like, no, this is where they need to go. They're not ready. But then there are some days where you can say, okay, we can nudge them, like we can walk the line. How do you deal with it? I say, for the people out there in the audience, get used to hearing the word no. You're gonna have more ads dead on the ground than you will ever sell. So you will be told no multiple times out of a day. I've even had clients, sometimes they want to be nice and beat around the bush, like, oh, we kind of like it. Like, maybe if you change this and let us look at it next week, like, you know what? Just tell us no. Because what that does is it frees you and it lets you go on to a better idea. So let it go. Like, that's what we have to do, because you will never get anywhere if you're still holding on to this idea that either someone has tried to kill or is lukewarm. Let it go, because there are always more ideas. And that's how you get to listen to your client. You get to a better place when you let things go.
Do other people have anything to add to this?
Yeah, we've all done things that weren't right for our clients or brands and tried to push it for one reason or another. And sometimes we found, usually, I think more often than not, you find out after the fact. When you do the thing and it's out there, then it's like, oh no, that wasn't right. So I've had some interesting situations with that one. But I don't know, like, I like a little bit of sort of the unexpected. I like being a little bit of the sort of rebel, like, or my team being a little bit of the rebel, and being the account guy, the suit, the business lead. Like, part of my job is to defend that. Like, I can't always be the spoiler. Like, even if I know I'm walking into a room and there's something that's not going to be sold, I'm gonna try my damnedest to help sell it, because there's always that one-off chance, and it's happened a few times, and I tap back into those sort of like examples, because once that dies in me, the team will smell it from a million miles away, and then I'll stop getting invited to the certain conversation. I mean, I've had teams, I won't blame this on myself, but I've had a team shoot a TV spot behind my back on the back end of another shoot. And I didn't find out about it until after, when they came to me with an edited cut. And I said, whose money paid for that? So I don't ever want to be in a situation where me and my team are not on the same, that was a one-off. But I don't want to be in a situation where we're not on the same sort of battlefield, going in, holding hands, saying, this might be crazy, but there's got to be a reason we're bringing it into that room. They believe in it creatively, we believe in it for the brand. Ideally, it's both. But ultimately, let's at least have the conversation and push for it as much as we can. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? They'll say no 10 times, and then we'll just go try to sell it to another client? Like, that's what happens.
I've been on the client side, so I'm the dream killer. I'm the idea killer. But I actually love, because I'm not the one that goes, oh, I'm like, no, that's wrong. Mm-hmm. No, I'm just too upfront. But for me, I kind of like, but I like that. I like where you're going. I like the boldness. I like thinking outside the box. So, and I've always been on the client side. So as a client, I appreciate it. And I feel like, sometimes you can massage it so it works, but I still like the bold outside of the box thinking. And I think, like what you said, like, if you stop doing that, then you might as well be the person on the inside and not be on the ad side. So whether you're on if you're on the client side, continue to encourage your agencies to do just that, to think outside the box, to present some things that might not work and things that you've never done before, because that's where you get that's where innovation is born. If it doesn't work, that's fine, but at least you have, you're taking the steps to like thinking outside the box and presenting new ideas.
I see. I want to leave some time for the audience to ask questions. Do we have any questions from the audience?
With big data, with net neutrality, with specifically targeted advertising. We used to live in a time period where everyone watched a box, and on that box you couldn't tell who was watching, when they were watching. It was just open. But now I can see exactly who you are, what your favorite thing is, what your favorite thing to do is, and I can sell you something directly. There's a lot of people who have taken advantage of that and built their own empires on their, within themselves. But like I said, laws are changing, particularly around net neutrality, where, someone in this room may not be able to start a channel, get up to 2 million views, and sell a product. They might have to work for advertising agencies, or they might not even have the opportunity that we've had these past 5 or 6 years. Where do you guys see the next 5 or 6 years? Do you guys think that it will get narrowed down, or do you think that this internet boom will continue to grow?
So, I feel like there are several questions asked in there, but I will say the hustle never dies. People are always hustling. The little guy will always hustle. No matter how big something gets, there's somebody underneath that doing their thing or coming up with the next new thing. No industry has, well, let me not say that. For the most part, no new media has completely eradicated the other media. Right? We had print advertising and the radio was introduced. You still had print advertising. The radio was around, everyone did radio, television came about. You still have the radio. So the internet is around, TV is dying, TV's changing. There's still video. Right. So nothing has completely erased the other thing. Now, there's more money spent here than it used to be. When it was over here, the money gets circulated, but I think the hustle is hard, and there are people out here hustling and figuring out the next thing. There's some guy that's sitting in his basement doing something that's gonna change advertising. But there's still gonna be another way in. There's always other ways in and other ways to do it. So I don't know if I completely answered your question, but I just feel like there's a way. There's always another way.
I think the shift is overblown. I think people tend to focus on all the things that are changing and not the things that are going to stay the same. The things that are going to stay the same are screens and interacting with video content or some type of content. Creativity is going to be the thing that separates the good from the bad. People like stories. Like, those things are not going to change. They're pretty human. It takes longer for that to change. So the jargon might change, the platform, the way you interact with it might change. Maybe it'll be in contact lenses. Who knows? At the end of the day, this is a really exciting time for content creators and creatives. Yeah, there might be net neutrality laws, and you might not be able to as easily get something up on YouTube, but big brands still aren't taking as much advantage of the opportunity of Facebook ads and paid social, right? So there's a democratization happening, and it may not forever be equal, but it's high time where if you're an individual or you're a small agency or you're somebody that's just gifted, you've got all the tools and they're becoming cheaper. You've got all the platforms to go out there and tell a story. And what's gonna happen is those large guys, because they can never catch up and they're starting from a different place, are just gonna co-opt that and pull you in, right? So that might not be everybody's ideal or dream, but there's always gonna be a demand for people that are fluent in the platforms, that can tell stories, and people that are persuasive. That's never gonna go anywhere. So I think, yeah, a lot's changing and people feel frantic, but there's a lot that's still staying the same. So I think people should take a breath and realize how they can take advantage of that.
I see. I think we'll
One more question.
Okay. Yeah, one more question over there. This gentleman in the yeah.
Hi, my name is Johansson. You guys talked about earlier about how a brand couldn't say that they care about social message if they never spoke about it before. So how would a brand be able to do that? For example, Pepsi, a couple months ago, they tried to say they care about a certain movement and that backfired. How would a brand be able to say, like, we didn't care about it before, but we care about it now?
I think it's a slow process, and I think you mentioned something earlier about you can talk on the subject without directly going after the subject. Yes. So I think they have to figure out, and then they need to play in an area that's, natural for them to be in. But I think it's weird and inauthentic when you just kind of jump into the middle of something that you never spoke about or never were involved in. And I think it's just a slow process. It's just, you have to kind of ease your way into the water. Especially for older brands that have a reputation already. If you're a new brand and you don't have all that, and I don't want to say baggage is a negative word, but if you don't have a history behind you, it's easier for you to kind of put your stake in the ground somewhere because you don't have as much baggage behind you.
And I think it needs to be like a holistic approach. You can't just create a TV ad and start speaking on LGBTQIA issues, for example, if you're not out there in the community. So I think it needs to be like a holistic, integrative approach.
And consistent.
I'd say ask yourself 2 questions as a brand. Why and why now? If you haven't already been doing it, it might not be the right thing to do, but maybe it is. But if you ask yourself why, we all of a sudden want to be about this thing. Is it the right time? Has a change, a shift happened internally, externally? But seriously, if you can sit there and have your organization or the people that are responsible for putting stuff out there ask themselves why and why now, I think it'll get a lot of the BS and a lot of the inauthentic stuff off the table if you truly answer that question or those questions.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing your insight. And thank you for attending the session.